Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee meeting of May 16th, 2022. I'd ask you all to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now I'd just like to ask if you could please stand for a moment of silence for all those who serve and have served in our military, home and abroad. Thank you. Please have a seat. Okay, welcome everybody. This evening, we would now first ask for the town clerk if he could have a roll call, please.
Member Reynolds.
Here.
Member Flaherty.
Here.
And Member Meglio.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. There is no minutes for approval this evening, nor is there any old business, and we'll continue with new business. However, we do have a couple of new business items that are non-fiscal year 23 budget action. So these are, first up, a motion for, let's see, we're going to look at order number 22029, which is Mayor Request for Appropriation, CPA Appropriation, Windjammer Cove Affordable Conversion Project, Supplemental Funds Request, or take up any action relative thereto. So, Chief of Staff, Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the committee. Hope everybody enjoyed this very summer-like weekend we just had. If I may, with your permission, we have another item on this evening's agenda. I don't have the number before me, but it is a request to approve the appointment of Mr. John Wentworth to the Commissioners of Pond Meadow Park, and I would respectfully request that we take that out of order so that Mr. Wentworth can go on about his business this evening.
Okay, that would be 22031. And I just asked my council, the committee members, if they have any objections to that. Thank you. I think we're good on that, so please proceed.
Thank you very much. And I would ask Mr. Wentworth to join me here at the table, if he doesn't mind. Thank you. For folks that don't know, this is a request for an appointment to the Board of Commissioners of Pond Meadow Park, which is a 3-year appointment. Mr. Wentworth is a lifelong resident of the town of Braintree and has also served the town in capacity as an employee for quite some time, including more recently where he served as a part-time employee at the recycling center. This also would be Mr. Wentworth's second go-round as a commissioner of Pond Meadow Park, a position that he held from 1999 to 2002 after taking over the term previously held by his father just prior to his passing. You've received a copy of Mr. Wentworth's resume, as well as the memorandum from the mayor, and Mr. Wentworth is here. Thank you for being here. And we would welcome any questions, or if you'd like to hear directly from Mr. Wentworth, we're happy to do that as well.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. Wentworth.
Thank you.
It's good to see you again.
Nice seeing you.
So I'd like to ask our committee member, Councilor Flaherty, if she has any questions or comments.
No questions, just Pond Meadow Park is one of my favorite places in Braintree. We used it a lot when my kids were little. Now they're big. We still use it. We walk all the time. The kids have been to camp there. It is a really wonderful resource in Braintree, and I'm so grateful to residents like you who step up to take care of this resource that we value so very, very much. And I think that it says it all, because here you are, ready to take it on again. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Councilor.
Much appreciated, and you will have my full support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Magler, questions or comments?
Yes. Hi there. I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
I'd like to hear a little, and I apologize for my voice. I'm a little hoarse after the weekend. But I would like to hear a little bit about your vision for the Conservation Commission and some of your vision around how your role will support or preserve Pond Meadow.
Well, I'm here to oversee the operation of the 2 rangers that are running the facility for the Army Corps of Engineers. And like I said, I've done it before, and again, I'll be on the board just to make sure it's run in good standards for the two towns.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you, Councilor Maglio. So, Mr. Wentworth, you and I do know each other. We have the opportunity to have worked together. Also, I've known you for a number of years prior to that. I'm very aware and knowledgeable of your experiences as an employee for the town. You performed an important role for our water and sewer department, and that was a result of the many years of accumulated history and knowledge on the job. It's important to note also your proximity of growing up in that area of the Pond Meadow Park, and therefore the extensive knowledge that you have of the area and the environmental impacts, particularly from the flood zones and the various mitigation measures that have happened at that site through the years that you have involved, as you mentioned just a moment ago, the Army Corps of Engineers.
Correct.
So I think you're an excellent choice to fill this vacancy, to represent the Braintree on that community board. I think that you will serve the town admirably, and I'm very, very comfortable and pleased to support your nomination this evening.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions of you, so I'd like to give you an opportunity if there's anything else that you would like to add for the committee's consideration.
Really don't have too much more to say.
All right. Well,
All right.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will now entertain a motion for recommendation to the full council.
I'd like to make a favorable recommendation on Order 22029.
Stand corrected. I do believe that's 031.
I'm sorry, 031.
Second.
We took it out of order, that's why.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We were making a full recommendation for your approval to the full council tomorrow evening.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We will take up, as I had previously stated, the first item of business we wanted to take up this evening is the recommendation on Council Order 22029, and as I had stated previously, that is the request for appropriation, CPA funds, Windjammer Cove Affordable Conversion Project, a supplemental funds request. So I will ask the Chief of Staff if she could please introduce the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So this request is a request for supplemental funding to funding that was approved for appropriation in December of 2021, and it relates to an agreement entered into by the town with Windjammer Cove to create additional long-term affordable housing that would count towards the town's subsidized housing inventory. And what the agreement does in a nutshell is, in exchange for financial compensation, Windjammer will execute and record a deed restriction on the property that designates at least 25% of the apartments, that number currently stands at 19, as affordable with either 65 to 80% of AMI. The total cost for the conversion was $2.25 million, and the plans for funding were from a variety of sources. The funding that was approved in 2021 was from two different buckets. The first was from the Turtle Crossing Settlement Fund in the amount of just over $1.1 million, and the second came from community preservation funding for a total of $993,856, coming in large part from the housing fund, and then just under $294,000 coming from the unreserved fund. The additional funding sources were anticipated to come from home funds, which includes an application process that Ms. Santucci-Razzi can certainly speak more about. But after further review and discussion around the availability of the federal home funds to cover the balance of the project, it was decided that additional CPC money was the more appropriate way to go to round out the town's commitment on this project. And so with that, we are seeking approval for an additional $153,185, which would come from the Community Housing Fund to complete the balance of the town's obligation in accordance with the agreement previously executed. And I would note that when considered by the Community Preservation Committee in April, they did vote unanimously to recommend approval for this appropriation. And with that, I would defer to Director Santucci-Raji if there was anything else to add, or we can certainly go right into questions.
I don't have anything further at this time to the committee, but obviously here for any further explanation or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome again, Ms. Santucci-Raji. You're becoming a regular with us now. All right.
Same place, same time.
Okay. So I'd like to ask Council Flaherty, if any questions or comments.
I am well familiar with this project as I voted on it the first time around, and I'm sorry that we didn't get the federal home funds, but I think this is a very worthy project. I think affordable housing is important for Braintree. I thought this move was smart and put us closer to the minimum threshold set by the state, and it will continue to have my full support.
Thank you, Council.
That is all.
Thank you. Council Maglio, questions or comments?
I do. So I was not part of the council, I believe, at the time that this vote happened. I think I watched it from home. And I'm just curious about why we did not get the funds that we applied for this federal piece.
Yep, so if I may, and I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to just do a little explanation after Councilor Flaherty's comments. So we did not get denied the funds. When we set out to do this project, and I'm kind of just rewinding a little bit, I wanted to be as creative and inclusive with a variety of funding sources as possible. So in that, identifying home funds are available, community preservation is available, and so were the 40B proceed money. The 40B proceed money, no-brainer. We've had the money in an account for over 10 years. We need to use it for affordable housing. Let's do something. Community preservation, as you all know, does provide opportunity for projects like this through the community funding bucket. And the home funds, so just a quick little snippet on the home funds, and I want to keep it brief because it could get very, very complicated. The home funds are funds that are available through the consortium, and I spoke a little bit about the consortium last week, so the group does have some background there. Those home funds are available to create affordable units, improve affordable units, and to further affordable housing in the communities in the consortium. With the home program and the HUD guidelines, as many of you may know, anytime you use federal money comes the checklist, comes the boxes, comes a variety of requirements. And I said, well, so what? I'm used to requirements. Let's give this a go. So myself and another young lady named Melissa, who worked for Windjammer, her and I basically became the worker bees, and we were going to figure this out, and we were going to do it because I said, we're doing it. So what we did was we started out in the application, we started out in the environmental review, which is a process that involves, you need to complete anytime you're using federal funds. So we went through that, we wrote to the Secretary of State, we sent this thing up to the Historic Commission, checking off boxes and going through all of these things, meeting with the consortium lead and meeting with consultants that the consortium uses that would actually underwrite this money that they would be giving for this particular project. And a couple things had come up, and these are just really the highlights of why we decided to not go forward. One of the reasons why we decided to not go forward is when you have affordable units in a rental development with market rate units, the affordable units are typically designated as floating units versus in a condominium where you have fixed units, meaning these are the ones that have the deed restrictions on them, these individual units that are owned by individual people. So I buy an affordable unit, I sell an affordable unit with the mortgage, all that different stuff. On the rental side, rental developers, 9.9 out of 10 times, will do floating units, which allows them to float literally, the affordable units throughout the development as long as the number of affordable units is being provided. And that gives them flexibility in leasing. If somebody is in an affordable unit and they become over income, then that unit becomes the market rate unit and the next unit available becomes the affordable unit. So it constantly allows them to just essentially float them so that they're not knocking on a door saying, hey, you got to get out of here and go over here because another guy's moving in here, and you can just picture that being chaos. So we want the units to be floating units, and the home affordable units would need to be fixed units. We had talked to the consortium about, will you take a floating unit? Will you take a floating unit? And they said no, because then we will need to inspect. The home comes with inspections that the consortium does every unit, every single year, and you're looking for $150,000. When we look at the amount of the money that you're looking for and what it's going to look like on the back end, we're not inspecting 73 units. And I know it sounds kind of crazy, but the more money, the more skin in the game, the more action that the consortium is willing to do, understanding these are all employees of municipalities managing this program. That was one of the reasons. The second main reason was, in order for us to make the application to the consortium for these four, it was going to be 4 of the units were going to be home units for $153,000. They would need to, the home will not pay for any work that has already been done. So Windjammer has been renovating. We entered into the deal with them. As long as all the units get renovated, we don't care the order that they go and whatnot. With the consortium, they said, we need 4 units vacant in order for you to make the application. And we need to inspect those units, and then we need to decide if we're going to fund this application. And we're looking at and talking with Windjammer, and I'm like, well, that could be months and months that you're holding 4 unrenovated units. And what is that going to cost you? And is that really what we just set out to do here? We're not looking to penalize this property owner. They're a partner with us in what they're doing for the town. So those were really the main reasons. We never made the formal application. We started to put together the components, and anybody's more than willing to look at them, at those materials if they'd like to. But it got to the point where I said, and I had a discussion with the mayor, and I said, I don't feel okay asking them to bank 4 units, because who knows how long that would be, and every month that they're not getting rent. They shouldn't be losing. They're already taking a hit in the rent. Well, we're subsidizing that with the money, but that's really not what we intended to do here. We intended for this to be a partnership and really a win-win, because who knows, this could attract other developers to do similar projects with the town through the community preservation funds. So we gave it about 120%. I was committed to doing this, and I exhausted it to the point that it became really a financial sort of burden on Windjammer, and said, look, I'm not comfortable with having you do that. We've really set this up so that the units can quickly be converted to affordable units. We have the application already submitted to DHCD, and we hope we get that approval very soon. So that's sort of how we arrived at this and why we're back here for the $153,000. The CPC felt it was a very important project, and it was such a small amount considering what we're doing here and the benefit to the community. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions, but those were the 2 main things.
Thank you. That's
You're welcome.
really helpful. I am curious just about the status of the work, and I know that they were rehabbing units as they became available.
Mm-hmm.
Have any opened up? Have they moved forward on any of those renovations?
They have about 2/3 of them done because they've been working on them little by little, and they've got really a great plan. They're doing sort of the same thing in all of the units. So if somebody moves out, they get in there, they renovate it, and then they lease it up. Yeah. So the goal, once we get the approval from the state, they're ready to go with, I believe, 7 or 8 units that they can use for the first lottery. And we're hoping we'll only have to do 2 lotteries, but we did design it for up to 3. And then once all of the units have been occupied by eligible households, then that's when we get to count all 73 of the units on our inventory. So as they come on, till we get to that saturation point, individual units will count towards the inventory, and then then it will turn over once we get to that 25%. I'm actually in the process now of updating the inventory. The state had sent some forms out to us, and I'll be adding the units at Frazier's building down here and the units up at Independence Manor as well. So not many, but I think all units are worthy and definitely help to move the town forward.
Indeed. Did you say 7 to 8 units, or what is the amount of units?
Total?
The goal.
It'll be 19 total affordable units,
19.
but we're gearing about 7 or 8 for the first lottery.
Right. Excellent. And just because you're here, I do just want to ask, in hopes that people are watching and listening, this is a really important opportunity for the town to achieve this goal. It's also important for residents who live there because these units are being redone, correct? So if people are staying in those units now, if they're living in those units, and they would like to be part of the affordable lottery, they need to fill out forms that I imagine Windjammer has probably already provided that kind of information.
The forms, no, that all becomes available when the units are available. It's done through a third-party consultant. It will be MCO Housing, who has done several lotteries here, and it's done by a third party. So we advertise it on the town website, and we put applications on the counter in the office as well. They do a pre-filing information session if anybody's watching or anybody's talking to anybody. It's very important that they go to that session. I have to tell you, in my experience and what I've heard, is a lot of people get disqualified because they don't provide all of the information. And when you have consultants that are getting hundreds of applications, they don't call everybody and say, "Hi, you forgot this." So those people, incomplete application, they're out. So there's an information session, and then they go over the forms. You have a chance to ask questions. It gets complicated. 401ks, pensions, all these different things, child support, different forms of benefits that people are receiving, Social Security, whatever it might be. So attend the session, ask the questions, and submit a complete application of the 3 things that I would advise anybody looking to secure an affordable unit in Braintree or anywhere. So there's plenty of resources for those people. When that is available, like I said, it will be Steve Leary in the mayor's office is awesome. He helps me. He puts it right on the front, says affordable housing opportunity, and we link it right up there with the form and the consultant's information.
Excellent. And then my last question / comment is, I believe it is state law that if you're living there now, although we would love to be able to have Braintree folks stay in a Braintree unit, it is state law that they don't move to the top of the list. Is that correct?
They don't move to the top of the list, but they do. When I submitted the local action unit application, which is the application to DHCD that basically says, "Dear State of Massachusetts, we have affordable units. Let us, okay these for us and approve these so that we can help our residents here." I submitted a request for a local preference, and if it is granted, that will give local preference to up to 70% of the units, which meaning Braintree people, any Braintree residents and minorities, and anyone that's handicapped receives special preference. And they would go into what we call a local preference pool.
Excellent.
And they pull the names from there, and then they get a second chance in the regular pool.
Okay.
So it increases their chances, which hopefully is helpful, but they're not guaranteed. All the units, we have to comply with fair housing laws, both state and federal, and all the units are awarded by lottery.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Councilor Maglio. So just a couple of questions for you. So we have a total of 19 that the town has purchased at the Windjammer Complex. And that represents 25% of the total units?
Correct.
Okay. And we get 100% credit for all of the units in that building, which is a total of 76, if my math is correct?
73. Let me just double check my paperwork.
All right.
Yes, 19 out of 73.
Okay, so it's actually more than 25%, isn't it? Well, here or there.
Yeah,
but-
it's enough.
Okay, it's enough. That being the point, thank you. Okay.
It's enough, sir.
So the total cost of the town for this conversion, as you stated in the memo, is $2,250,000.
Correct.
Okay. And the town's first CPA appropriation for this project, under Council Order 21058, was $993,856. Okay. So that difference, this is where I'm checking my math, that difference of $1 million, roughly $1.2 million, is being made up originally from a collection of sources. Is that correct? Settlement funds, first of all.
Just settlement funds.
Just settlement funds?
Yes.
Okay.
It was going to be settlement funds and home, and now home's out, and we're back for that delta of the 153.
Okay, and the settlement funds amount was?
$1,102,960, and that was approved as part of Council Order 21-059.
Okay, thank you. And so that leaves us here, and the reason I'm asking this, I don't see what the actual request number is in the document.
Oh, I'm sorry. 153,185.
153,185.
Can be found on page 2 of the memo dated April 25th.
Well, let's see. In the motion, on the back side. I'm glad to see we're using double-sided. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. So just one other question for you. So the basis for this decision is through some conversations that you had with the state?
No, it's actually, the consortium is, the lead of the consortium is in Quincy. So it's actually my counterparts in the Quincy Planning Department.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And we, just to follow up, Chairman Reynolds, Liz Manning, that is our CPC coordinator now, has a lot of experience with the home program. And I mean, we were like, okay, can we split it up into two separate like we basically came at this with every possible ask and question to really exhaust this as an option, because I really was committed to making that work. And,
well, thank you, and that doesn't
yeah.
surprise me, having a history of also working with you. So my question really is how does this, it's more of a curiosity.
Yeah.
So the rationale was for this amount of dollars from this consortium, it didn't really rise to a level of management in the way that you had just described to us.
Yes, I mean, to be kind of,
well, my main question, I might...
like the hurdles and the requirements that were going to come under the home didn't really make sense for $153,000.
Right. So my question, getting to my question then is, what would you envision to be, just from a curiosity standpoint, as we continue to manage affordable housing and possibility of these very similar types of situations coming together? A much larger scale, obviously, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly.
For the home funds?
Right, for that
Yes.
type of what you had envisioned in that assistance.
Yes, yes. Really, and I mean, even the counterparts in Quincy, they're like, is it like, it's not worth it for 150, when we got, because we had a lot of back and forth. And again, I think you guys know my style and are starting to, I was just, well, what if we do this? What if we do this? What if we do this? And just an example, I give this an example because it kind of puts things into perspective. Wind Properties across the way at 44 Allen Street is interested. They're going for all different levels of local, state, and federal funding for their project. And they're looking to make an application to the consortium, and they're looking for over $1 million in funding, and their application is 1,000 pages of materials. And when you're looking for that kind of money, and your project is all made up of state and federal subsidies, they all have the same kind of rigmarole and the same requirements, and that's basically the field that they're in. They have people that just do this all day long. Just to kind of, you know, draw an example. If I had to say, you know, if the town was interested in pursuing these home funds, it would really work if we decided to purchase a piece of property and convert that into an affordable development, 5, 6, 7 units, and we were looking for, you know, millions of dollars. We put millions into, there's a senior affordable project going on in Holbrook right now. Some of you may know the consortium has put almost $2 million into that project.
Okay, so for the 44, if I understood you correctly, the 44 Allen Street is looking for $1 million of the consortium
Correct.
funding. Okay, all
And
right.
the whole idea of having to hold the units, and that doesn't come into play because it's not built yet.
Got it.
So the things that were going to impact sort of the time and us being able to do this in a timely manner and get the affordable units online doesn't come into play with the new development because there are no units to hold. There are no units for them. Everything is new.
Well, thank you. I mean, that perspective, that clarity, I guess, between an existing building with residents already in it versus something new. Thank you. That was very clear and helpful from my understanding. Just to add a little bit more of that perspective now I have for the various types of funding where they could be most appropriately used. So thank you. I appreciate that. So that really is it for my questions on this topic.
Okay.
Okay. At this point, I'd ask if there are any further questions or comments from the committee members. Okay. And with that, then we'll entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion for favorable recommendation on Order 22029, request for appropriation, CPA appropriation, Windjammer Cove Affordable Conversion Project, supplemental funds request.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's see. Very good. Okay, do we have our next on our agenda this evening is a continuation of Motion 22025, Mayor, fiscal year 2023 operating budget. So we will need to take a motion on this to remove the operating budget off of the table.
I would like to move that we take Order 22029
25.
off the table.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. So, Chief of Staff Todd, where would you like to start?
Thank you. I think we're slated to start with the fire department this evening. And with us tonight is Chief James O'Brien, as well as Financial Coordinator Mary Ann Bossy. I would invite them to take the seats next to me. Mr. Needham was kind enough to add a second mic so we can share the table. And as they join me, just by way of reference, materials with regards to the fire budget can be found on pages 45 to 53 of Appendix F, and the salary detail can be found on pages 32 to 43 of Appendix L. Earlier this afternoon, we provided the committee with a summary of the fire department operations as well as an overview of this year's budget. And I think with that, it probably makes sense to head straight into questions.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Welcome, Chief. And welcome, Ms. Bosby. Good to see you again.
Thank you, too.
All right. I would like to ask for any questions or comments first from Councilor Flaherty.
I really only have two concerns, and the first has to do with controlling overtime. Can you just describe, for the public record, the kinds of efforts that you're making to bring those numbers in line with where you want them to be?
So a little nugget of how we get to the overtime numbers that we do every year. We have a 17-man minimum manning, which is contractual. So once we dip below the 17 men, which is very easy to do, we have 21 per shift, firefighters per shift, and when 5 firefighters take the contracted time off, we automatically hire 1. Now you throw in sick time, injury time, COVID, admin, and retirements along the way that we're already shorthanded. We're down 5 firefighters currently. That's how you reach that number. The steps that I've done to control it, we've had a bunch of long-term illnesses, mostly due to COVID, some due to heart attacks, a couple were heart attacks. It's in the contract that after 60 shifts of an individual being out injured, I have the right to drop the manning from 17 to 16. And what that does, if I do it on one group, it usually saves an average of $10,500 a week, just for one group. So if I were to do it for all 4, if they fell under that restriction, then obviously you'd just multiply that times 4. But right now we're 3 groups are running at 16.
Okay. Do I understand correctly that you are bringing one of the trucks offline in order to try to make sure that you reduce your minimum manning?
It's the only way we could do it. We could have done something with dispatch, or we could have taken the tower ladder 2 out, which what we do is when we have a structure fire, we have ladder 2, which is at headquarters, and I misspoke earlier, it's tower ladder 1 in the Highlands. And those 2 trucks will converge and form 1 4-man crew. Instead of 2 on a truck, you now have 4 at a structure fire, which is, NFPA standards.
How long do you intend to sustain that change?
Until we get the long-term injuries and disabilities back, which in the next 2 weeks we will have 2 more back. So 3 out of the 4 groups will be back at 17 men.
Okay. I know that as you made that decision, you did kind of a mental risk analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of illustrate for us your thoughts along those lines, how you weighed the risks versus the rewards of that decision?
Well, obviously we're a little pinched for money, so to speak, and we were looking for ways to cut down on the overtime costs. And this, in my opinion, this is one that, again, as long as we have a 3-man ladder crew, we're good to go. Most of the time, when we have 2 ladder trucks at an incident, 1 will stage, which means it will just park, and the 2 will come off of the tower or the ladder truck and just join up with the other 2. So we'll either have a 4-man crew or a 3-man crew, depending upon the manning.
Okay, and you feel like there are enough occasions where the second ladder truck doesn't come into the equation beyond being a staging, that this is safe for our community?
That's most of the time that happens. And I should add that we also have mutual aid, which we provide a lot of, and we give more than we get, I can say that. But if there was ever an incident of a large scale, we have Quincy, Weymouth, Holbrook, Randolph, all the neighboring towns that are under the mutual aid agreement to supply another ladder, another engine, just as we do.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Sure.
My other questions have to do with concerns over fuel, because the gas prices are up, and diesel and regular both are up.
Right.
The DPW has anticipated, 300-some-odd% increase, but I don't see that folded into your budget to the same extent.
Right.
Do you have concerns about that?
Yes, I do. We were up over 1,000 runs annually last year than ever before, mostly due to COVID. So obviously the trucks use a lot of fuel. I mean, I think they get about 4 or 5 miles a gallon, those big diesel engines. So it is a concern, but I think we'll address it as we go.
Okay, as you go, how will you address it?
Just request supplemental.
Okay. Well, I hope that the prices come down, but
So do I.
I think everybody in America hopes for that. Those are my questions for now. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Maglio, questions or comments?
Yes. So I had the opportunity to meet with you and to go for a tour of the station and to get some information from you, and I appreciate that very much. And at the time you mentioned the grant writer,
Mm-hmm.
who is a firefighter who happens to have a flair for this kind of talent and who has been successful in doing some grant writing. And without going into any detail, I'm just thinking, is there sort of a ballpark that you could identify in terms of the amount of money that the grant writer has been able to bring in?
He's procured almost $2 million in probably the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay. And has that been mostly for the capital?
It's usually for equipment. It's all different times of the year, and we pounce on every opportunity that we can to apply for these grants, and he's very adept at, and very skilled, I should say, at securing these grants, so we're pretty lucky there.
Absolutely. If you didn't get the grants in, how would those things be paid for?
With larger requests in the line items.
Or go without, I would
Or
imagine.
go without. Some of them we can't go without, so they would have to be.
So the reason I'm asking those questions is because a small stipend that's in the budget seems to more than pay for itself and bring a lot of returns. And I'm wondering, it just occurred, I come from a grant writing perspective of things that if we have this talent in our ranks and they have such a good ratio, is there ways to expand that person's time and opportunity to work on a grant?
I will tell you, his name's Dan Cross, and he probably, I would say he puts 20 hours a week into this. He really does. He does a lot of it from home, a lot of phone calls, a lot of legwork, and for the stipend that he gets, and he did not get it for a long, long time, by the way. This was only in the past 3 years.
Negotiated into the last contract.
So 3 years. We've gotten a pretty good bang for our buck out at the end.
Absolutely, and I think that's why I'm really trying to kind of shine a light on the opportunities.
Right.
There's, the idea that things will come back before for a supplemental request, or the hope that prices go down, or for gas, like that's all hopeful and reasonable, and yet there's also some opportunities to be a little creative, and there's someone who has a talent who's spending 20 hours a week doing something that really he's not being compensated in any way close that is commensurate with bringing those kinds of resources in. So it would just seem like that would be a creative opportunity to perhaps bring more money to the table for the fire department were the town to invest more in his skills or someone else's skills. So
Great idea. I love it.
So how does that happen?
I guess just thinking about that, and Dan Cross does a phenomenal job. If you remove him from the traditional staffing, because he counts towards the minimum manning now, so he counts towards your 17, but if you remove him from the count, that potentially creates additional overtime in filling the position if you drop below the manning. And so it's a dance that the chief does, I think, in trying to control overtime, but also dedicating a good amount of time to the grant component of what he does.
And I'm not a good dancer for the record. So.
I
Looking at this,
understand.
you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, that takes planning, it takes it doesn't just happen, and I completely understand that, but I would also think that we are dancing right now. We are all dancing. There is not enough money to cover the needs of the town.
Right.
And so if ever there was a time to hit the dance floor and to bring some new ideas and creativity and leadership to our various departments and actually go to all of you and say, listen, let's be a little unconventional here. Let's think outside of the box. Let's figure out ways that we can bring in more revenue. And for the town to make that investment in you and your judgment, I think would be something really important. It's the leadership that I would like to see happening, rather than taking things out that we know we need, or not doing things that we know need to be done because we are looking so tightly at a budget that doesn't cover everything we need. So, other questions and comments that I have would be, this is a silly one, but the abbreviations on these documents, these printouts. BR, is that Brotherhood? Is that Branch? What does that mean? Maybe Mr. Spellman, that's one for you.
Preceded by uniform.
Yes, Uniform
Branch.
BR.
Yeah, okay.
Branch.
Uniform Branch. Okay, great, thank you. The other thing that I was wondering about too is in terms of the fire department. The fire department is union,
Correct.
correct? Okay. And so in terms of, because I know that there are a lot of, or I've heard, and I've been asked, there are a lot of, I think it's called legacy situations in the fire department where offspring, children, relatives of town employees, etc., maybe their parent was a firefighter, and so there's generations.
Yes.
In the fire department. And I'm just wondering, how does that happen when there is a union hiring policy? Like, what is the mechanics of that?
It's not a union hiring policy. They have nothing to do with it. It's administered by the town. There's a test every 2 years. This time it was 3 years because of COVID. You have to score well on the test to get a job. It's a very, very tough test. It's not civil service. It's part of it is, but most of it's practical. It's a 1,200-page book that these men and women have to study, and you need to dedicate a lot of time to it. And if you happen to be your father or grandfather or mother or whoever, it's not that you're getting any preference. We did away with points for residents, and we just have a Braintree list versus a non-Braintree list. So you still, no matter who you're related to, you still have to score well.
Okay. And then once you score well, it comes down to where you live, right? If you're a resident versus a non-resident.
Right. We have to exhaust the Braintree list before we go to the non-resident part of it.
Okay. And then is that in an order? Is that a list or is that a pool?
Well, they're ranked in order of score, and their interviews also play a big part in their overall score as well.
Mm-hmm.
The HR director, Karen Shanley, sits in with me and two of my admin deputies.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And the reason that occurred to me is that when I look at the fact that this is a solid career, this is a great opportunity, the circumstances of the living conditions right now are certainly not where we want to see them be, but this is a great opportunity, and we then invest in them when they come on board, it also looks like, because I see various pockets of educational line items.
That's a contractual benefit that provides financial compensation for various educational achievements and degrees. So once you're on, if you have anything from an associate's to a master's, the collective bargaining agreement affords you additional financial compensation.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last sentence?
So depending on the level of education that you have, the collective bargaining agreement affords you certain financial benefits associated with that degree level. That's what those education lines are. It's not providing for additional education, it's compensating
Oh,
for
okay.
already achieved education.
So these would be more basic, these are more stipends, these educational funds?
Correct.
Okay. So then I won't ask my question about what kind of, well, I will still ask it actually. Are there trainings and certifications and professional development that are required of the firefighters that we provide or encourage that
Well,
might be in a different fund?
A prerequisite of the job, you have to become a certified EMT within 1 year of your appointment. Other than that, the certifications that a lot of the men and women acquire, they do on their own. There is no compensation for it. We do have hazmat stipend, a couple of other stipends, but it's nothing that's apart from private education that one would do on their own time.
So they would get the stipend after they get the education, not to pay for the cost of getting the certification or the certificates or...
You go through training, we have training quite a bit over at headquarters, and once they complete the training, they're eligible to get that hazmat stipend or whatever other stipend you may see on here.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I think that covers everything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on that one last issue, was just for my clarity, the educational versus, so the educational, somebody goes to, as you stated, from an associate to a bachelor's degree, that educational, is it specific to firefighting or fire sciences?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. And I think I understand the stipend for, that you had just mentioned. So would that pertain to, I'm looking at EMT incentive, page 48 of tab F as in Foxtrot.
So the EMT stipend, I believe, is $900?
Yes.
$900 per firefighter, regardless of rank. Again, that prerequisite of having your certification after a year came about in 2000, I think, or 2001. So everybody from a certain firefighter down has to be certified.
Sure.
And they get compensated for it annually.
Right.
It's built into their salary.
All right, so it's above and, but it's its own separate line item. It's above
It is.
and beyond what they get for their pay,
Yes.
their
Yes.
salary, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. But the EMT incentive, is that exactly what that is for?
Yes.
Okay, and that's just another term you've used for stipend in this particular case?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay,
It's been there long before I was there.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That helps clear things up. The next questions I have, again, will be related in some way to overtime, and I just want to understand again, you did a good job, I think, of explaining some of these previous questions that you had, but I just want to make sure that I get some of these numbers clear and that I understand their differences. So I clearly understand that you are broken up, the way that your organizational, your operational structure is you're broken into 4 groups.
4 fire suppression groups.
Right, 4 fire suppression groups. And of those groups, they make up 21 firefighters.
If we had a full table of organization, we would have 21 firefighters per group.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a dependency on that full table of TO&E. Okay, got it. The 17 number.
Mm-hmm.
So you're generally operating, because as you stated that you've had some folks who are out of work for various reasons,
Mm-hmm.
that are not active, if you will.
Right.
So you do not have to pull anybody in if you are at a count of 20 or 19 for a group, do you?
Or 18.
Or 18. So it's just 17 is the bottom line. You have to have at least, as it states, minimum manning.
Right,
Personnel.
right.
Of 17.
When we
So-
dip below that, we hire.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. I just needed to try to get those numbers. And when you say firefighters, we're not talking just, I don't know what the expression for someone at the lower end of a firefighting organization.
Private.
A private.
Private versus an officer.
Okay, great.
Officer could be lieutenant, captain, or deputy.
Okay, so this includes both privates and officers of various ranks
Yes,
that make up the 17 minimum.
correct.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. Okay. You had also made another comment that, you know, as far you were asked about alternative methods to the pulling a vehicle, one of your apparatuses offline. And the comment was, we could have done something with dispatch. What exactly, could you just explain that a little bit to me?
Well, right now we're running a pilot program for our dispatch. We have Brewster Ambulance who does our dispatching for us, and we have a firefighter in there 24 hours a day to monitor, to make sure that, first of all, no runs are missed, but also you're in there to jump the call, so to speak. Meaning, once you hear it come over, 911, you call upstairs and you get the engines out the door.
Okay, so I understand that. So is this firefighter part of the minimum manning?
No.
So that's above? So
Yes.
you essentially, okay, so really it's an 18.
Well, they're working at a reduced rate of $45 an hour, which is, I think, almost $15 less than you would get if you were working a regular overtime shift.
Okay, so 45 per hour,
Yes.
above and beyond their regular 24-hour shift. Excuse me, 20.
Pay grade.
40. I'm trying to understand now. Again, your shifts run. You start on a, what did you say, Monday? I
Yeah.
think?
If we started, the crew working today started at 8 a.m. They will get off at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. They have 2 days off. They'll go back Thursday. Then they have 4 days off, and they repeat the cycle.
Right. Okay, so there's their regular work week is a 48-hour work week
It is.
for your 17 minimum manning shifts.
Yes.
48 hours. And then the dispatcher would be from your ranks, and they paid a flat fee of $45 per hour to fill in as a dispatcher.
That's if we need to hire. If we don't, if we have, excuse me, if we have 18 men,
Okay?
firefighters, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong terminology. If we have 18 firefighters, we will have one of the firefighters on duty do a quote-unquote watch for $5 an hour additional.
Okay. Okay. All right, so that person basically comes off of you're above the 17, you're at 18, you take that 18th person, you put them in that dispatch room, and you give them a $5 additional stipend per
Correct.
hour on top of that for performing that function.
Correct. So if they work the 24, they'd get $120.
Great. And if you were already at 17, that's where you'd bring in someone at
We have to
45.
hire. Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. And could you tell us what actual savings you get when you take that one vehicle off and now have brought it down to 16?
Well, the average, if I just average it out between privates and officers, and the average 24-hour shift for overtime is about $1,500. So if you went 15 times 7, you come up with the 10.5.
Okay. Great. And that equates to a savings at this point of overtime, on average, $10,500 per week.
That would be for one group.
For one group.
For one group.
So so one group, and the number of groups per week that are employed?
4.
Or deployed are 4.
4.
So you multiply this 10,500.
Right now,
potentially.
Correct. Right now, I instituted this about 3 weeks ago. And again, I anticipate 2 of the groups to be back within 2 weeks. We have 2 more coming back off long-term injuries.
Okay, okay. Wow, that's a significant savings.
It is.
Well, at this point, but it's not something, as you just added, really is sustainable, or I should say an opportunity to save money once you get back into a more full force, which is going to minimize, from my rationale, would minimize your need for overtime with a fuller force available.
It would definitely, and as a chief, obviously, it's the last thing I want to do. Part of my job is, looking after the public, and when you have less apparatus,
there's that old balancing act.
Tomatoes, whatever you want to call it.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Discerning these little differences really makes a difference in understanding. Okay. It's a better question than I can answer to others who ask. Okay. Obviously, police and fire both are very high-profile organizations within our municipality. They're critical roles that have to be filled. We cannot ignore them. We can't allow for that lapse, if you will. But along with that is a high cost of doing business.
Good public safety costs good public money.
Yes, agreed. It does. So, are there any other? You as a chief or your senior leadership team, do you belong to any kind of professional associations in the area where there's the sharing of similar problems? I'm certain you all share the same types of problems.
We call it the Brotherhood of Tears. It's the Metro Fire Chiefs and the Norfolk County Fire Chiefs.
Okay. And have you found that you've been able to borrow anything from other areas that could be applied to your own operations that have worked out?
We're kind of in a different situation because we're not civil service.
Okay.
So we're actually the largest non-civil service fire department. I believe we are anyway. We're in the top 2 or 3 in the state. So a lot of the problems that other chiefs have deal strictly with civil service issues.
Okay, and if we were a civil service, what types of problems would be added or to your plate as it pertains to, say, overtime?
I have to tell you, Mr. Chairman, I got enough of my own problems. I block theirs out.
So as far as you couldn't project, if you had a civil service, if you had a civil service department, is there any way that you could give just some insight to the committee of how differently that might pertain to your abilities from a budget standpoint?
I have to tell you, I know nothing about civil service departments.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Certainly.
I think the application of civil service to the department would lend itself less to the financial allocations and the spending and more to matters around hiring, bypassing, promoting, and disciplining, because civil service as a state agency oversees hiring and promotion and serves as an appellate body for appeals around those areas as well as discipline. So I think it would be less finance-based and more personnel-based if we were to be a civil service organization.
Great. That was a terrific, very straightforward explanation. And
I was going to say that, but Nicole didn't.
Chief, I understand.
Just about to come out.
Not to worry. Not to worry. But, so again, there's another balance. Right? We had a previous question about the types of folks and how the hiring process works here in Braintree. Okay. So, all right. Well, that's an interesting perspective to just have, and I appreciate that for adding that. So, I just want to take an opportunity. Really, I had highlighted a couple of items. You've answered some of those questions already. I'm walking through now the hazardous. I do see the hazardous is a line item in each of your subsections. Again, was that a stipend-related item?
Yep, that was a stipend that was negotiated as part of the last round of collective bargaining as part of the overall package in recognition for the nature of the work that the firefighters do.
Okay. The job hazard, not necessarily a particular function of in each one of these departments. It's just the job hazard that goes along with the job.
Well, hazmat incidents happen, not every day, but
Yeah.
you may have 2 or 3 in a day and then go a couple of days without one, but they could be
Okay.
on a large scale, small scale, but they do happen.
All right, thank you. And that was all I had as far as my highlighted items that I wanted to take a look at. I'm sorry, I do have one other item here. So, we have, let me just go back. So we have an increase of 11%. Page 50 of tab F, Foxtrot, is, you have an 11.6 increase in uniform branch. And I believe that, and you say fire hazmat, I take it that your hazmat operations?
Yes, those are contractual step increases. Anything you see hazmat, you'll see fire prevention, they should all be the same.
Okay, and that hazmat, all right, so that's a step increase that goes along with the job description.
No,
Yes.
but it's contractual, so if whatever the raise would be, 2%, that would reflect.
So that also, in this case where the contracts aren't settled, that reflects a step increase that will be owed in fiscal year '23 to the employee that serves in that role. So on the 1-year anniversaries, employees get a contractual step increase. So the money built into this line is intended to cover that. Any additional cost of living that's negotiated is in a reserve fund that we've discussed previously.
So, okay. This 11.6 increase is one individual?
Yes. Yes, if I could clarify that. So we've had 3 out of the 4 admin positions, we've had retirements. So that when somebody comes in, you would actually save a little bit of money, shifting over to that next person. But you're going to see a little bump in clothing, cleaning, things like that, because they need uniforms, different gear, that type of stuff. So that's where you would see those little bumps.
Well, the reason I ask is it's not a little bump at 11.6 for one individual. I'm trying to get my head around it.
We'll have to go back. I don't know.
Is that training? Can I see it?
We'll have to, I think, go back and double check to confirm, because that line should reflect just the step increase for the employee.
Okay, so that's an acknowledgement that that number is incorrect?
It is not. It is an acknowledgement that we need to go back and just verify where the numbers came from in creating the budget.
Okay, so, all right, so it'll be important to me to understand an 11.6 increase for an individual in 1 year.
Certainly.
Okay. Okay, so we will, I'm trying to avoid a callback.
What I'm looking at is, it looks like what may have happened is all of the step increases fire department wide were noted in that line as opposed to in the individual programs, because I don't see increases in the uniform branch in any other program, but I would expect that at least some of our officers some of our firefighters are obtaining step increases at least those that are not at the top step, which is very few of them, but there are some. And so that would be my expectation, is that the total is the same. The money was perhaps inadvertently located in the wrong line. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. So you will provide us with some clarification and corrected numbers,
Absolutely.
as well as wherever else those numbers would apply in the fire budget?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So, again, as I just stated, I'm trying to avoid a callback. So what would be the expectation of seeing those numbers prior, or just what, let me just state that. What would be the expectation to see
I
that
think
correction?
we will make every effort to turn this around for you by tomorrow so that you have the information potentially in advance of Wednesday evening's meeting. And if additional information is required beyond what's provided in writing, rather than an additional night, we could ask the fire chief to join us Wednesday evening when we're scheduled to hear from the schools.
That would be fine.
But
Is there
feel
any-
free not to.
Say again?
Feel free not to invite me in Wednesday night.
I just want to ask the other committee members if they're okay with that. Okay, thank you. Yes, Clerk Casey.
Meeting on May 18th, scheduled just for education, but there's nothing against the open meeting laws that they could provide you with an answer that evening
Right.
with those questions, just so you will be prepared to make a motion on the 18th to the full council for the 31st.
No,
Now, let's
Understood. And I think because the budget is posted by overall order number, nothing would
Right.
prevent the additional discussion with regards to this budget or any others that evening.
right, so we'd be fully within, you know, guidelines.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you, I appreciate that. That is all the questions that I have right now for you, Chief.
Okay.
I thank you, and I thank you, Ms. Bossy, also, for this being here this evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Mr.
Oh,
Chairman,
I'm
could
sorry. One moment. I think I had another comment or question from a committee member. Council Maglio.
I have a couple of others. So, on page 5, we have a snapshot of the fire department, sort of the aggregate, the line items folded in, and there is a number, fire suppression, which is $8.7 million. Are there other costs folded into the other line items that are salaries or reimbursements that are not counted in fire suppression, which actually I should ask, is that the salary? Is that what we're calling salary?
Right. Fire suppression would be the 84.21 per group. That would not include the admin.
And the fire suppression budget can be found on page 48 of Appendix F, and that includes, in addition to salaries, it includes budgeted funds for working out of grade, overtime, the contractual benefits that we've discussed, including uniform allowance, uniform cleaning allowance, equipment-related costs, etc. So that 8.733 is broken down into various lines on page 48 of Appendix F.
So, well, then I was actually going to go to Appendix L, but
Okay.
I will look at that page on Appendix F because maybe that answers my question from, and I don't have to ask Appendix L. So, Appendix F, which page, please? I'm sorry.
48.
Okay. So, all right, that does not answer my question.
So then,
but thank
if you go to Appendix L, page 34,
So, okay, that's where I am as well. Perfect.
you
So,
see the uniform branch 511008, and then you see the breakdown of the individual positions that make up that line.
and so let's say this firefighter, second line down,
Mhm.
80,191.85.
Mhm.
Okay, so if that particular firefighter happens to go from a bachelor to a master's that year, would that extra educational stipend, is that reflected in that 80?
It is not, because the educational stipends are referenced separately. They're their own line item, 514002, and it's on top of a salary. So what you see in Appendix L is just base salaries.
Okay. So then if we come back to page 5 of appendix,
No appendix.
no appendix, the main part. So then I think I still have my question then. I'm still confused.
Okay.
Because what we see kind of separated out in various line items, and again, and I apologize, I'm brand new to this, first fire department budget process for me, but what we see are stipends and reimbursements and salaries and whatever we want to call them that are embedded in different line items that sort of explain what they're for. Educational bump up, hazard material bump up, EMT bump up, etc. Okay, so where is the line that all of those funds for overtime, for stipends, for salary, which line is that?
Sure. So if you're looking at fire suppression specifically,
I'm talking about for the entire fire department.
so the way that the fire department is organized in different categories effectively by job responsibility, fire suppression being the largest. So if you look at the fire suppression program, which is page 48, contained within the program are multiple line items that fund that program soup to nuts. It funds the equipment costs, it funds the salary costs, it funds the contractual benefit costs, and then it also funds the overtime for that particular division of the fire department. And so that's what you have on page 48, is the breakdown of all those expenses that make up the 8.7 for fire suppression.
So then where would it be rolled up so that at the end of the year someone's doing their taxes or the town is looking at our workers' comp fees? Like there has to be a place where the compensation that everyone gets, regardless of what division they're in or regardless if they're regular time or overtime, there has to be a figure.
So I guess, so if you're looking for how much pay is given,
Yes.
base salary plus any benefits.
Yes, plus any cash benefits, any of these other funds that are dollars that are paid in the form of stipends.
Sure. So that payroll would have a breakdown because that's how it gets submitted per individual. But so if you're looking at it, if I'm going down the line, so you have your base salary contained in the uniform branch line. You have your educational incentive if you're entitled to it. You have longevity if you're entitled to it. You have the EMT incentive, which everybody presumably should have because they're required to have it. You have the hazardous duty pay. You have your uniform allowance, your uniform cleaning allowance. Those are the financial contractual benefits that are paid to those firefighters involved in the fire suppression division of the fire department. And the individual amounts associated with those are tied to the collective bargaining agreement.
The individual amount of the base pay.
Of all of those.
Of
So the
all
cleaning
of them.
allowance, the clothing allowance, education allowance, longevity allowance, hazardous duty pay, EMT incentive, those are all spelled out in the collective bargaining agreement as negotiated benefits.
Okay, so then, so if we were to look at everything in 220 on page 5.
Page 5, okay.
Which of those line items don't end up in payroll?
So if you're talking about fire suppression,
Talking about 220, the whole fire department.
where do you? No, I'm sorry, when you say 220, that's where I'm not catching you.
The main, page 5,
Yep.
in the, it's part of the table of contents. that it comes after, it's, I mean, there is a breakdown per department.
Yeah. Sorry.
Do you want, it's okay.
So I'm looking at page 5 that has the, I see 220, the fire budget number 2.
Yes,
I
yes,
got it.
okay.
So that is the total, those are the 9 individual programs that make up the fire budget. And the programs are broken down in pages 45 through 53 of Appendix F, right? So the large majority of the expenditures are either salary or contractual benefits. The items that are not contractual benefits, for example, would be postage, cell phone, printing and forms, office supplies, meetings and seminars, dues and memberships, all of the utilities, all of the equipment costs, all of the building maintenance costs.
If I could interrupt you, I'm sorry. Those categories aren't here.
They're in the detail though, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
But I'm just trying to figure this out. How much of this, like building maintenance, does that include pay for building maintenance, or is that just a budget to maintain the building? Equipment maintenance, is it that pay the person that's doing the equipment maintenance, or is it the screws and nuts and hoses and things?
So if you look at page 46,
okay,
building maintenance program, that breaks it down.
Okay.
Lighting,
All right.
natural gas, water and sewer, equipment maintenance, building repairs, custodial, and furniture.
Okay.
So custodial would be the only cost associated with a person, presumably, right?
So this is all rolled up according to these categories here, and there's, in this book anyway, there's no kind of cross-reference that shows just that figure for what people get in paid.
Well, it's only broken out base pay. And that's Appendix L, is the base pay, but not with the additional contractual benefits, no.
Is that something that we could get?
Sure, we certainly could, because that's how the payroll is generated. So it may just take a little bit of combining spreadsheets, et cetera, but certainly that's something we could get.
And it doesn't have to be any kind of detail other than that total. I'm just looking for, out of the amount of money that is invested in the fire department, how much is invested by the way of a person doing work and getting reimbursed.
So I actually think the best way to do it might be to simply provide you with a copy of the collective bargaining agreement, because the collective bargaining agreement will list all of those benefits and the associated pay that corresponds with the benefit.
I don't think so. I would really just rather get a number.
Okay, so we can go through the contract, and we can go through the budget and provide a number, but appreciate that it's going to vary. Somebody who's been on the job for 30 years is going to get greater longevity pay than somebody who has just started. Somebody who has a master's degree is going to get more than somebody who has an associate's degree.
But somebody needs to know that in order to plan these numbers, right? So that it's got to exist somewhere, I would think, or else what basis?
In generating the budget, yes, that certainly does exist. So if you're looking for every firefighter, and I guess that's my point, is it's not easy to generalize, because everybody potentially earns something a little bit different, because their years of service may impact their benefits. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think I'm probably not making myself clear. So let's say we have a small fire department in a really small town, and it costs $1 million, and we have 25 people who work, or 50 people who work in that fire department, and we say, well, how much of this $1 million is going toward individual people? Versus,
you want a department total, not an individual total.
I do not want an individual total. I want to not have to connect the dots between, there's this line item that is for hazmat pay, and then in this department there's one for EMT, and in this department it's both EMT and hazmat, but then over here there's an actual total amount of base pay. I'm just looking for that aggregate figure.
Okay.
If that's...
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
was it, except for one really simple, I promise, really simple. There was underneath one of the overtimes, it said something else, and it said OU, and I wasn't sure what that was. Let me find that. Working OU?
Working out of grade? Working out of, it's out of grade. So if you're filling in for somebody of a higher rank.
Excellent, okay, thank you. So that would be another salary line item. So that would be part, like that would roll into that end of year aggregate number, right? That would be another one. Okay, all right, great,
The
thank you.
way I'm thinking about it is, what are we paying to a person versus what are we paying for a equipment, a utility, et cetera?
That's exactly
At
it,
its
and I don't
simplest.
need any more details than
Okay.
that. I may ask a question about it, but
Sure.
I'm not looking for that now at all.
Okay.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it. I'm done, thank you.
Thank you, Council Maglio. So, before we move on, I just want to ask, any further questions or comments from the committee? Thank you. Okay. So, as I was saying earlier, thank you. That was a very good exchange. Thank you, Chief O'Brien. Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Ms. Bossy. We appreciate your time this evening and your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask, Mr. Chairman, for a brief recess, just to use the restroom
Certainly.
before we move on to the police
We will
department?
take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Recess. Thank you. It is Thank you, Bill. Hot off the presses. Thank you. Whoop. Thank you. Okay, yeah, I don't need that right now. Okay, we're ready to come out of recess, and want to welcome Chief Dubois. How do you pronounce it? How do you like to pronounce it?
I say Du Bois, but a lot of people say Dubois, and I just
Du Bois.
roll with it.
Okay, that's all I'll say. And Sergeant Chambers, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here with us. And I'm sorry, I don't know who your partner, your third member of the team is this evening.
We are joined with us this evening by Mary Kenny, who I've just learned her title is staff executive, but I'm going to go with finance coordinator, as she has taken on a bulk of the financial responsibilities as a supplement to Sergeant Chambers' expertise.
And that was, I'm sorry, Kennedy?
Kenny.
Kenny. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Kenny. Welcome. And I also want to acknowledge our acting auditor, Catherine Pomeroy. Welcome again with us this evening. And certainly, if you do have any questions, please let me know. Give me the high sign. And
Will do.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Okay. So, Chief of Staff Taub, do you want to open up things?
Thank you very much, Chairman Reynolds. We've already met the folks to my right. Last week, the committee should have received the FY23 proposed budget summary on behalf of the Police Department, providing a detailed overview not only of the operations of the department, but also highlighting some of the adjustments being made as we move into fiscal year 23. Reference to the Police Department's proposed budget can be found in Appendix F at pages 34 to 44 and Appendix L, pages 13 to 31 for the salary detail. And I think as we did with the Fire Department, it might make sense to move straight into questions from the committee.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to ask Councilor Flaherty if she has any questions or comments she'd like to start with.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I know it's been a long meeting. I'm sure this section will also be lengthy, but my questions are largely the same as I asked the Fire Department.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, can you identify the extent to which, so it's about overtime, really,
Sure.
Which is always a challenge, and I recognize the difficulty of that. But can you identify the extent to which the arrival of the incoming officers who are new will help the Braintree Police Department reach minimum manning guidelines?
Sure. So I can give you an overview of overtime, just as a kind of how we arrived there. So there's a lot of different aspects of how overtime is earned. I'll leave it for last, but primarily it's patrol operations. But there's also other parts of the department, like detectives. And say the last big incident that we had at the plaza was about, I want to say, $25,000 overtime cost that week for all the investigations for just the detectives. And then communications for us. So we have 9 civilian dispatchers. So when they're out, we backfill for them. So that's obviously about a set number because of their vacation time, and you can estimate somebody's sick time and training and all that kind of stuff. But there's some backfill there. And in the patrol operations, there's a couple aspects of earning overtime. Essentially, one would be like late calls. So something happens at the end of a shift, the person that responds stays. And just like over this past weekend, I was just reviewing the log, and it almost seemed like every shift there were several people that got held over to finish dealing with an incident. So cumulatively over the course of the year, it does add up. And say court time, so officers obviously go and do a lot of things in their off time, so they get compensated overtime for that. So court time is obviously a big cost for us. So any big incident, there'll be multiple officers that will go to a court case, and we're at the mercy of the court, whether it gets continued or how long, how many times they get called back. And then really the biggest focus for overtime is backfill, the minimum staffing levels that the fire chief explained. So we're in that same sphere, I guess, to a certain degree. We don't have the minimums that they have for like a 24-hour shift. We have per shift. So we have 3 shifts, and each shift has a different set minimum that we created. So we have 6 sectors, and then the plaza has 3 officers Monday through Friday, and then we have a certain amount of supervisors on every shift. So when we get down to certain minimums, we replace and backfill. And what's happened in this past year, which is opposite the prior year, is that we're at minimum staffing for every shift, other than we call them spare officers. So say the evening shift will have 6 sectors, 2 supervisors, a watch commander, which is a lieutenant who oversees the entire patrol, and say 3 officers down at the plaza. So there could be about 10 or 11 officers working. In prior years, we would have maybe 12 or 13. We'd have a couple of spares. I think at one point we had 3 or 4? 4? I think 4 on the evening shift. So we set minimum number of people off per shift also, which controls the overtime to a certain degree. So we only allow so many people to have the day off. So what we had in the past is we had 4 spare officers, so they were extras. When somebody was off, they would fill in for their patrol sector or down at the plaza. Currently, we have 2 spare officers for the whole patrol force, which it doesn't really backfill it doesn't really save us any overtime. We're basically at minimum staffing levels. So when any person takes the shift off, we have to fill it for overtime. So that's how we've arrived at this number, and this started last June. And currently, just to give you an idea, we have 6 officers out on long-term disability right now that we do expect to return, some of them, not all of them. 2 of them have pending retirement package, they're in the process. We have some that, we just don't know when they're going to come back, if they do. So there's 6 of those officers, and we have basically 6 in the police academy. We have 1 in the police academy right now, which she'll graduate in August, and then we have 5 planning to attend in July. They start July 25th. So that's essentially the 12 officers that we're down. That is creating, that has created the overtime that we're in. The goal is with the 6 new officers, we'll be able to get up to a better staffing level so that we can allocate spare officers on every shift and reduce the overtime. Kind of that's the broad overview of how we arrived at overtime, but I'll give you an idea also how we control it. So I talked to Mary and I and Corey and the 2 deputy chiefs. We talk pretty much every payroll period about what the overtime is, and kind of how we got there, and if we have an idea what's going on. Like currently right now, it was budgeted, but we had the records management system just replaced and just got implemented. And Corey and Mary have been working on that like around the clock. Corey and another officer have been full-time assigned to that. So our computer system in the police department, from everything, absolutely everything we do, dispatch, receiving calls, booking prisoners, doing police reports, accident reports, everything is a records, it's called an RMS system, records management. The one we had was probably 30 years old. It just went out of, they stopped servicing it. And that was statewide, well, I think countrywide, but statewide, everybody who used that system, which was probably a majority of the police departments, had to find a new records management company in a new system. So 2 years ago, before I even started here, I went and observed another police department. So it's been going on for about 3 years now. So it got implemented, but that created 8 hours of overtime for training for each officer, and then a whole bunch of other additional overtimes, just processing that and getting it implemented. We're in week 2 of it. It started last week. So it's a huge learning curve. So we have people on every shift that were like user experts, because if people have an arrest and they can't process somebody, they're going to have a really bad night. So the records management system is one example of some of the overtime costs this year that we anticipated. And then there's also mandatory training to be certified through the Municipal Police Training Committee or the Police Training Council. So they have 40 hours of what we call in-service training that every police officer has to achieve every year. And then we do some extra when we can afford it at the range. We just did rescue task force training, which is a combination of us in the fire department and in the EMS, the ambulance personnel. We used the school when the school was closed for the week during school vacation for just additional task force training. And then in reduction, some of the mitigation that we have done is redeploying personnel assignments to try and offset the staffing to kind of anticipate when we're going to have the highest amount of people off, which is typically the evening shift for us. It's the most people working, and it's more senior people, so they have more time off, say vacation time and whatnot. So we try to allocate personnel based on what we think is going to be the high-use shifts. Unfortunately, we don't have enough extra people right now, but that's what we've done in the past. And this year, I think we have 2 that are what we call spares right now. So it does help. It mitigates some of it. And then we've transitioned from on-duty training, which used to be off-duty training. So it would be when somebody was off, we try and do as much as we can while they're working, so we're not paying overtime and they're still receiving the same training. So, for instance, like Corey will come in and he was doing the Pro Phoenix training. So he would come in, one person on overtime on his off shift, but pretty much everybody else would be on shift, or as many people as we could. All the detectives, all the people who work Monday through Friday, that type of stuff. Anybody that we could bring in, so it wasn't any additional overtime costs. So we've tried to maximize that as much as possible. And then we've really had to limit any additional training for everybody to really the minimums that we have to maintain. We've reduced that as much as pretty much everything additional that we have to pay for. There is some grant-funded opportunities that we utilize, but they're few and far between. We have understaffed one of the detectives, the drug units. One of the drug unit detectives was promoted, so we haven't been able to replace him. We're hoping to do that once we get the 6 additional new officers, once we get them all established. It won't be one of them, obviously, but we'll be able to select somebody and put them in the drug unit. There's normally 4 officers in that. We're down to 3. And then probably one of the most inconvenient things we do for the department is we freeze time off. So we typically have a maximum of 4 officers off at one time, and that does mitigate some of the overtime costs. And when we have spare officers, it almost neutralizes it. But what we do, like say last week, we had a lot of police officers went down to Washington D.C. to attend a couple of ceremonies that Officer Cushing, Officer Seibert, and Officer Donahue were involved with. But we had to freeze time off. So at a certain point, we just said, okay, nobody else can have any time off, because we're at this point where we don't even know if we can fill it with overtime unless we start forcing people in. And one thing that we're very aware of and we're very concerned about, I guess, and that we kind of keep tabs on is forced shifts. And for us, that's something that when we get to the point where we're forcing people in, whether they have to get held over or they stay late and to backfill, it's concerning for us, because then you're getting people that honestly don't want to be there, and they're tired just because they're working too much or they have a lot of other things going on in life. So we try and minimize that as much as possible, and sometimes that means forcing shifts. And we freeze overtime. We freeze days off like Braintree Day. So we're freezing that day off so that everybody's going to be here, so we're not, we're minimizing the amount of overtime that we need. So it's honestly a constant discussion that we have, I would say definitely weekly, to try and manage it the best we can. But ultimately, it comes down to staffing and personnel costs. And we knew last June that we were going to have a rough year with the amount of people that were off and the amount of pending injuries that potentially they're not going to return from. Like I said, 2 officers since then have put in for retirement. There's a couple more that could possibly do that. Could be tomorrow, could be 6 months from now. So once we replace them, I think we'll be in a much better place. But that's not going to be until probably next March when they're going to actually be effective for us. Because when they graduate the police academy, there's about a 12-week training period that we give them. So it takes a little while for them to be like out on their own. But we do anticipate it during the next year, but it's probably going to be next March time frame before we see any relief. I hope that answers the question. I know it's pretty long-winded, but overtime it's something that we talk about constantly. It really is.
I know it is, and I know it is a significant challenge, and I appreciate that overview. It does help understand a lot of that you put in the text of your description, but it's helpful to hear you elaborate on it here in the meeting. And but I'm still trying to zero in on, we have 6 new officers, and your biggest problem is that you don't have the spare officers that you have, relied on in the past.
Correct.
So now we're going to have 6 new officers, and what I'm trying to zero in on is a couple of things, like the things that you're listing as measures that you've taken in order to handle overtime, things like limiting additional training.
Yep.
I mean, I want our officers to be as trained as we can possibly get them to be, so I see how that's such a disadvantage, and also understaffing the drug unit and freezing time off. I'm sure that that's terribly unpopular. And I know that the Massachusetts State Police does force people to come in when they need them for overtime, and that's unpopular too. And I can see all of the concerns that you have about that kind of a policy, and I'd like to be able to dodge it. So my question for you is, to what extent will these 6 new officers, A, help mitigate these 6 officers?
Yep.
How much will they help mitigate these actions that you're taking, which I know you don't want to take, but you're doing because you have to get those overtime costs under control? And the other part of the question is that you identify an industry benchmark of 10% of the total budget, which which overtime should represent. And that is what your overtime budget at the beginning of the last fiscal year was designed around. And then, we had all of the events that you talked about and all of the things that happened. And it's hard to know, whether those are extenuating circumstances at this point or they're just the status quo. I hope that they're extenuating circumstances. But to what extent will these officers bring us closer in line with the 10% industry benchmark that you mentioned?
So a couple things. The mayor's office, Nicole and I, and the mayor obviously have discussed getting us to a point where we're budgeting the correct amount for overtime. That's the goal. We made some progress last year. This year, the mayor's office added the $400,000 to what we had originally requested to get us up to $938, I think it was.
$1,107,926 across all programs, which is 9.7% of the total.
So anticipating or estimating what the overtime needs are going to be, we're getting closer to that, so we don't have to come back and ask for a supplemental. Obviously, there's going to be times when we have big incidents or unforeseen circumstances that we will, but I think that number in the future, if we continue on this path, is going to be a very small number, hopefully. Ideally, we would have probably 95 officers, maybe closer to 100. I mean, in best case, in my perfect world. And the reason I say that is I think there's some big deficiencies in the service we provide in certain areas. We have one school resource officer, and for our community, she's overburdened. She's jumping around between several schools daily, and it's just a lot. And the patrol force supplements that and assists her. And family services also does a lot with the schools with Lisa, the school resource officer. So in a perfect world, we'd have a few more, school resource officers. We would have a traffic division, which we used to have, and through attrition and just for whatever reason, it's kind of just it kind of dissolved. We could certainly have a supervisor and I'd say 4, so maybe a total of 5 traffic officers that just deal with all the traffic issues that we have countless complaints on. And commercial motor vehicle enforcement would be one of the aspects that they could do, which we get a lot of complaints about tractor-trailer traffic all over. And then the focus of the savings would be the extra officers on shift, so we're not running minimum staffing on every shift. That's where the savings comes in with these 6 officers. So out of the 6, we're going to put 1 back in the drug unit as of right now. That's the plan. So we'll have 5 officers to distribute amongst the different shifts, and we'll maximize that distribution. So it's probably going to be mostly the evening shift and what we call the release shift, where they work 2 evenings and 2 overnights. The day shift isn't as high of a demand. We would probably have 1 of them, so we on the day shift. But we try and look at where the senior officers are, where the people who use the most time off, and then we can assign them to those shifts. Just to reduce the need to backfill, so that when people are off, we just slide somebody in, and when they're not, when we have a full complement, we have extra people out there, and pretty much every day is so unpredictable. Say the evening shift, we have 1 incident down at the plaza where we have a big fight in the food court, which seems a little more than it should. I mean, that takes almost everybody that's working. So when we're at minimum staff, we feel it. And so if we have spare officers, 1, we feel like we have adequate staffing for a big incident, and 2, it does give them the opportunity to do other assignments where the watch commander or the patrol sergeant can say, hey, we've had a lot of problems in this area, I want you to stay up there for the shift. So they can get some special assignments to deal with specific issues. So the 6 officers, when we get them, they're going to be absorbed pretty quickly. I think it will make a significant difference. But certainly if I could get 6 more, I'd be thrilled.
I would too. And I hate to keep asking the same question again and again,
Sure.
but when we have these new officers,
Yep.
how much closer to the 10% goal will that bring us?
Well, I'd say it's a guess, because we have 6 people out right now. So we're going to get back to possibly having extra officers, maybe 2 on each shift, on the high need shifts, the ones, the most use. If we had those other 6 officers return and we have the 6 more, we'd be in really good shape. But I anticipate some of those officers that are on long-term injury not returning. And so we're going to have 6 people fill in, and we're going to be kind of back to neutral again, because those 6 officers that are out might not come back, or they might retire. So I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but we're down 6, so we're at bare bones minimum. We're going to ultimately get 6 more during this fiscal year. So now we're going to have a few extra bodies to distribute amongst the patrol force, 1 person in the drug unit. And out of those 6 that are out, if they all retire, so we're not really going to be ahead of the game. Our numbers are going to be still at minimum. If they come back, then we're in a little better shape.
Okay, so the reason you're struggling to answer the question is because we don't know what the 6 who are out are necessarily going to do.
Correct.
I understand. That is helpful. I wanted to return to you were commenting on the Traffic Bureau, and
Yes.
I just want to circle back to that because let's see, what year? I think after 2019 we had to eliminate the Traffic Bureau, and it was just for budget reasons, and that was where we thought we could apply it, I guess.
Right.
But can you describe the service we'd be able to expand if we were able to staff that branch of the department again? And the reason I ask is because residents often ask me, can you get the police to, pull people over who speed or enforce tinted windows law, or
Sure.
they run traffic lights or stop signs. So, that's why I'm asking about that department.
Sure, I mean, I guess I would look at it in the same aspect of any other specialties we have. So like the drug unit, their sole focus is dealing with drug investigations. A traffic unit, their focus would not be responding to calls. It would be to enforce all the traffic violations, all the complaints, probably investigate, accidents. We would have them so there's a certification that's pretty difficult to obtain as an accident reconstruction specialist. So any serious personal injury accidents or fatalities, they would investigate that. Right now, we have to rely on the state police or Quincy, and I don't know if Weymouth comes over, if Weymouth has any, but Quincy does. So we rely on other agencies, and that's not always ideal. So they would be certified in accident investigations. So ultimately, their focus would just be anything related to traffic that we can assign them to. So what happens now when we receive those complaints in a neighborhood, and quite honestly, we get them weekly, we'll assign the sector car. We send out a notice, or they do it at roll call, and they read it, they have a roll call summary every shift, and they'll say, okay, go up to whatever street you want to name and deal with the intersection because of red light violations or speeding cars in the neighborhood. And the officers will go up there and pretty much inevitably get set up, maybe stop a car, and then get a call, and they have to leave. Or something happens and they have to leave, and they don't go back because whatever took them away, if it's an arrest, I mean, the rest of their shift is consumed with dealing with the arrest, dealing with the police reports, maybe any other aspects. Quite often, every arrest we have ends up spending some time at the hospital. So, strangely enough, whenever people get into the cell block, they have chest pains and need to go to the hospital, and they spend 2-3 hours up there at a minimum. So the officer that is available, if we have somebody, they have to drive up with the ambulance and stay in the hospital with them until they reach and drive them back. So there's always something that takes them away from a duty like that with traffic. So having a traffic unit would eliminate that distraction, and they could solely focus on any of those issues. And there's quite a bit of them, quite honestly. I mean, I'm certainly aware of them.
So it's not just that the town of Braintree needs traffic enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the traffic enforcement that we do at present can sort of hamper the other duties that police officer would otherwise be doing, because you can't be in two places at one time.
Yes, I mean, in a general sense, and I would say the patrol officer's responsibilities are they're assigned a sector in the town. They're responsible to patrol that area, to be proactive, and that involves motor vehicle enforcement, which they stop a lot of vehicles, and it's just to specifically assign them to one street because of a specific complaint. They might go out there and spend a half hour there, and the resident who called and complained might not have seen them, or they didn't see any violations. So the resident doesn't know that their complaint was responded to. A traffic unit would specifically go and talk to those people and probably figure out a little bit more and spend a little more time with that, because they'd have the time to devote to something like that. That's typically what you'd see.
Okay. Just two more questions.
Sure.
So about gasoline, the DPW, I went back and looked at their budget.
Mm-hmm.
They have, depending on what line you're looking at, a 258 to 347% increase in gasoline, in just fuel, whether it's regular or diesel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was explained that the DPW has contracts for fuel, and we enjoyed some low contracts for a little while, and those contracts have come to an end, and unfortunately now we are going to spend more. So they've elected not to lock in the rates that we have now, because those are terrible.
Yep.
Well, there's some hope that it will go down, but and we'll be able to avail ourselves of lower rates because we're not locked in right now.
Yeah.
But so it doesn't seem like you guys have included increases in fuel costs in your budget. Okay. So when I asked the fire department that question, And obviously, you're going to run your vehicles, and we're going to pay for fuel. But is your plan? There's no place in your budget where you have to reach for fuel costs. It will be a supplemental. Is that right?
Corey's the expert in this one.
If I may, generally when we prepare the budget, we follow guidelines that all town departments get on preparing that budget. In order to increase our fuel budget, we would have to, as you mentioned, pull from elsewhere in the budget. We run a very lean operating expense budget at the police department. Almost 94% of our total budget is personnel, which quite honestly for a department of our size to have less than 7% dedicated to operating expenses, of which gasoline would be included, is low, quite frankly. So there's nowhere to pull. We're too lean. If we pulled from anywhere else, there would be another bill that we can't pay for something else that we have to pay.
Yeah.
So to answer your ultimate question, we left that level funded, and we would anticipate should fuel prices continue to rise or stay where they are currently, that it would be necessary to ask for more fuel money in a supplement.
Okay. So there's not like a reserve line somewhere in your budget that I've overlooked?
There is not.
Okay. That answers that. And then the last thing is, I noticed that the Patrol Bureau has a 71.4% increase in staff development, which sounds awesome to me, but I don't really know what is entailed in that. So can you elaborate a little?
The entire increase in that line item is for the 5 new officers attending the academy. It covers their academy tuition and their upstart costs for equipment and uniforms for the academy that the academy requires us to purchase. So there's no base increase in training for the department overall. The increase that you see year over year is exclusively for the 5 new officers.
So we bear those costs whenever we take on new officers?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's a $3,000 fee per student officer to pay the state, and then all the uniform, equipment, books, and all that kind of stuff. But it's a flat, the $3,000 is a flat fee from the state that we pay for them to attend.
Okay. I had thought it might be related to the accreditation that you've been doing, but it sounds like the answer is different from that. That is all that I have. Thank you so much for your kind answers. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And Councilor Maglio, any questions or comments?
Yes. Hello. A lot of what you just mentioned actually answers some of my questions. So about 90% of the total cost of the police department budget goes to staffing. 94%?
93.1%.
It's $11,480,000. And the remaining $857,000 is non-salary related.
Okay. So then a similar line of questions that I have, when we look and we see educational line item, when we see career career incentive, maybe that is, okay. And other, like those are embedded in the various divisions. So are those stipends for officers, or are those training kinds of professional development opportunities?
Those are personnel costs that are contractual and encompass a total compensation package for an individual officer. Generally, that includes base salary, educational incentive, career incentive, shift differential, accreditation, and longevity. So
educational, that's here on the police administration page, for example, that is incentives for achieving another degree, a certification. If you wanted to just talk about that.
I mean, the overview is it used to be in Massachusetts the Quinn Bill, which you may have heard of.
Yes.
Which gave incentives for base pay across the state. The state funded half of it, and the communities funded half. Probably about 15, 12 years ago. they zero funded that line item in the state level. So it was a 10% incentive on base pay for associate's degree, 20% for a bachelor's, 25% for a master's or a law degree. So when that was zero funded at the state level, pretty much every community that used that or had negotiated in a contract were scrambling. And I think very fortunately in Braintree they funded it fully here. That was part of the contractual agreement back then. So it's a big incentive. Obviously, it's something that had been going on probably since the late 60s, I believe. But that's factored in. So it changes every year because we ask people if they're going to obtain a higher degree, if they anticipate graduating, from an associate's to a bachelor's or whatnot. And I'm going to guess with these numbers because I think I gave them to you when when you did the tour, but we have 3 officers that have law degrees. I think we have about 25 that have master's degrees, and everyone else, other than 4 people out of the 85, 86, have a bachelor's or an associate. So we have a very highly educated police force, quite honestly. But it does reflect in all the different programs. So the administration one it's myself, the 2 deputy chiefs, I think 2 lieutenants, and 2 lieutenants who myself and one of the lieutenants have law degrees, and I think everyone else has a master's. So, but that's just the administration. So then obviously the other programs are broken down with detectives and patrol and whatnot. So there'll be a breakdown for each one of the groups as far as education and the other ones.
Great. The police matron, I had a question about.
Yep.
I'm just curious what that is and why that is. That a female police officer for the holding cell, perhaps, or?
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. When we have a female detainee who's been arrested or protective custody, we call a matron who is not a police officer, but is called in to basically watch that detainee, rather than that detainee being on video and communications / dispatch. So every year that budgeted amount kind of changes with the historical trends. And so I believe we did reduce it a little bit for FY23, just based on historical data.
It's utilized for any female detainee and then any suicidal people that we have to watch directly. They'll call somebody in. It's actually it's much cheaper than having somebody in on overtime if we don't have enough staff.
I bet.
And if it's a female, they'll go to the hospital and they do transport them over to court also with the officer, so they stay with them until they're released.
Okay, great. So I did have some same questions about the traffic bureau, because that too is something I hear about often. But you really answered that very comprehensively. One last question I have is more just about curiosity with the animal control department. I noticed that is the overtime for that is decreasing, and I'm just curious why there would be less overtime on that particular line.
Just like many of the overtime categories, if you will, it's all dependent on his call volume. We have one animal control officer, Dave Littlewood, and he's great. If there's an absolute emergency that patrol cannot handle, he'll come in from home. Historically we've seen a slight decrease in his off-hours calls for service. The other reason is contractually the union that he is a member of negotiated for the ability to take straight compensatory time instead of overtime pay. So he has availed himself of that ability a little bit more in the new contract year for that union.
Excellent. That's helpful, and I'm glad to hear that he's still available for whenever those needs come up.
He provides an excellent service, that he's on call 24 hours a day, and he never hesitates to come out. We see him quite a bit.
I have to say that's another comment I get a lot, and it could just be because people know that I'm interested in that, or it could be because it's just so widespread, but I hear all the time about how responsive and compassionate and kind that officer is, which is why I want to do the ride-along with him as well, so keep that in mind, please. Okay, I am done with my questions. Thank you.
Councilor Maglio. Okay, I'll start off like I did with the fire department and talk about OT. So, I do like the implemented measures that you put together to mitigate the potential of OT, or I should say, to keep the number in check. As you've articulated previously, there are just too many factors that are out of control for you to actually put a figure on what overtime is going to cost you. And there are many contributing factors to that. So, having a proactive approach of any type is very welcome, so thank you for implementing that. And one question I had is the last item where you periodically are freezing time off allowances to ensure the adequate staffing.
Right.
I'm interested in what are the triggers? What are there, say, more common times that you are throughout the year that you are going to find yourself in a situation where you would need to implement this freeze?
Well, any big events we anticipate, Braintree Day is one that we have already locked down. Last week, Police Week, we knew there was a lot of officers wanting to go down to Washington, D.C., so we locked down time off. And our bigger concern, honestly, is filling the shifts. So if we didn't lock down time off and just say, put a freeze on it and say no more, or nobody can have it off, the bigger concern is that we would be forcing in everybody. So historically on Braintree Day, for example, a lot of people would take the day off, just presuming to enjoy the festivities. So the end of the night is when we need the most people. And what would happen is the evening shift would be fully staffed with all the officers that are working the midnight shift. So you would assume at the change of shift you'd have like double staff for that overlap. Well, typically it was the same people working the evening shift were staying for the midnight shift, so there was no extra help. So they couldn't find people to come into work, so they would have to either order people in or make some other kind of adjustment. So by freezing that day off, now we know we have 10 people working evenings, and we're going to have 6 more coming in at the midnight, so we're going to have that extra help if we need it.
Right, so I understand that. That's a great example as far as Braintree Day goes. Yeah. But you're on, let's just say, other than, say, Braintree Day, what are some of these triggers? Are there other times of year that you would implement this freeze, or is it specific maybe to some isolated events throughout the year?
I'd have to say off the top of my head they're isolated when we anticipate a lot of people needing the time off or wanting the time off. I'm trying to think of any other examples. Yeah, it really started. It was happened often last year. We had so many officers out injured after the shooting incident.
Right.
So last summer was tough. So what happens typically is COVID. Nobody could take any vacation. So at the end of the year, we had a lot of people with a lot of vacation time. So we had to limit, how much time people could take off. So situations like that, I don't anticipate that this year. But we'll look at it and see, how many people, we take a look and see how many vacation days are left, so to speak. So we have an idea how many people are going to be looking to get time off. But it's really incident dependent or
okay,
thinking
well, I
ahead.
think you've answered my question. So what I was looking for, are you proactively looking at trends, various things of that nature? And it sounds like you are.
Yeah.
As an example, the way that you stated the COVID, where now you had a significant amount of vacation time of across the board for all of your personnel, and they wanted to use it. However, everyone can't go on vacation at the same time. So
Correct.
I was just trying to get a sense of just how it, you know, it seems to be a tweak, kind of an approach, but I like the idea of it, but it can get tricky. So that's where my question was more out of curiosity. So you've clarified for me a little bit, maybe a better understanding of this freeze type of approach.
Yeah, I can't tell you, the two deputy chiefs and I, you know, it seems to be a constant discussion, the staffing and making sure people aren't getting forced in, so we watch that. You know, we're watching all the trends pretty much weekly, just to see where we're at. So,
and of course, there's a fatigue factor that you have to balance in as well.
Absolutely.
If no one's getting the time off.
Correct.
All right? So, okay. I'll move on from that topic. There's a lot of questions asked this evening on the overtime, so I've got a very good understanding of this and your kind of mindset at it. So I have some other questions that really are more in line with individual line items and just trying to understand maybe how they fit in overall. So I see this one's more out of curiosity, a decrease in longevity of 74%.
Which account is that?
That would be administration, page 34.
We had now Chief Del Papa in Abington. He was one of two people who left the department in this fiscal year. So he was assigned to that particular program 1 administration. He was eligible for longevity, but the lieutenant who replaced him in that program is not yet eligible for longevity.
Okay, so this is more, I had a sense that perhaps this may have something to do with attrition, normal process of attrition, where you're with senior people either retiring or they're moving on to advancement of their career. Okay, thank you. The shift differential, I'm just trying to understand here. That's the next line. It's been zeroed out for the previous 3 years. This year it's projected as $3,789.28. However, the percentage change is a zero. I don't know if that's just a typo.
On my schedule, the percentage change is 100%, so it may be a munis.
A munis? Okay, well that's what we want to. We have noticed some things about. We know that munis is a shakeout process.
Right.
Right. It's the first year really that's being implemented. So we're just trying to make some notes as well to see if we can help along with some suggestions or just other items that make this. Because I know there's a lot of good features to it, but of course you need time to ramp up and get used to it and practice at it.
Appreciate any comments.
You got it. Thank you. All right. I don't know what it's cut off. Medical PA, down 40%. Is that another attrition-related item, or is that something else?
That's in the full title would be medical payments. I mean, the majority of medical payments that happen related to our staff are covered by the town's insurance or the employee's insurance. This line item is more specifically for isolated incidents in which we may send someone to be looked at or whatnot, but it's few and far between.
New hires?
And new hire, sometimes new hire evaluations. So again, this is one of those ones that is based on historical trends that we felt we could decrease the budget.
Okay, I mean, I was hoping you were going to give me a good story to say all of that proactive medical health and, walking and, what HR pushes, right? They're all paying off.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, but that was a great explanation. Thank you, Sergeant. Dues and membership are up 18%, and I don't know, could you just give me a little idea? It's a small number as far as the dollars go, but I'm curious.
There are many things that are paid out of that line item, but primarily the increase is related to an increase in Metro-LEC dues. Metro-LEC is Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council.
Okay.
So they increase their fees across the board.
Got it. Well, I'm glad that Braintree is a part of that. I know they play a key role in it themselves, your officers. Let's see. Okay. I'm not going to talk about holidays. I just want to get an understanding. I mean, it's a line item in all your various departments, your groups. Holiday. So just explain to me, what does holiday mean?
Holidays, they're contractual, so it follows the town's schedule of approved holidays, which the number is 12 days per year. Contractually for our unions, or the police unions anyway, the officers have a choice between receiving 8 hours of compensatory time or 8 hours of holiday pay. So every year, in advance of budget preparation, Mary surveys the department and gets a sense of what people are going to elect for the coming year.
Okay.
So the number does fluctuate with how many officers choose time versus money. And of course, the dollar figure is also tied to salary. So in a year where there were COLA increases, it would go up as well.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that answer. Very clear. We already talked staff development. Career Inc. is an item I've seen. It's a little different in each department. I think it was zeroed out. It might have been administration. I think it might have been zeroed out. But what is Career Inc.?
It stands for Career Incentive.
Okay.
It's essentially a day shift differential. So if you're assigned full time to the day shift, your shift differential, so to speak, comes out of Career Incentive. Whereas if you are full time assigned to our night shift, evening shift, or relief shift, your shift differential comes out of the line that says shift differential.
Okay. And is there anything involved as far as in the shift differential scenario of difference in grade that you're covering, similar to what we had heard in the fire department? A lieutenant backfilling a captain, etc., gets the captain's pay?
Yes. I mean, everyone has 3 overtime rates depending on which shift they are working. So the overtime rates themselves, but I think what you're asking is out of grade pay, which would apply when a sergeant fills a lieutenant spot.
Right.
It's not a lot of money per shift, but it's under $40 per shift. So if I, as a sergeant, am the watch commander on a shift, then I am entitled to that out of grade pay.
Great. Okay, and you actually just provided a little bit further clarification for me on that actual shift differential based on your first answer to my first question. Thank you. All right. This is also cut off police DET, and it's up 46%.
Sure. The full name for that account is Police Details, which it encompasses only details at the South Shore Plaza, not any other details at all. There's a separate fund for that in the town. So that number is basically a function of what is left over for police details at the South Shore Plaza when you take your starting point of what the contractual agreement is with the plaza, less the fire department's allocation, less the salaries for the 3 police officers assigned to the plaza. And then the end result is what is left over for police details.
Okay, understood. And being knowledgeable of what that agreement entails, so thank you. All right. I'm a little curious here, being an old military guy, and why your radio maintenance is going down, but I have a theory. Upgrading your equipment have anything to do with this? Or is it a target of opportunity for savings?
My answer would be that it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
But as you know, historically, we made a significant effort to upgrade that equipment that was very old. We're actually still in the process of that, but we are light years ahead of where we were a number of years ago. So the maintenance costs have gone down, although what we are seeing currently is that the prices of things are going up, just like pretty much everything in the world. The prices are going up, but your allocation is actually being cut on that. Right. We still generally don't expect to spend quite as much on radio maintenance, and we had to find some places where we could reduce costs a little bit. So that was one where we felt comfortable reducing it slightly.
Okay, well, that was that was a complete answer. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Holidays we talked about. evidence, and it's cut off, evidence with the letter followed by the letter P, down 23%.
Evidence processing supplies.
Okay.
Quite honestly, we don't take in quite as much evidence as we were 2 or 3 years ago, probably largely pandemic related. But that's another unpredictable thing. But we base that number on conversations with the property and evidence officers and the current inventory of supplies that they use for evidence processing. And we have a good inventory now that we should be able to finish the year off strong with. So that's another area that we felt comfortable reducing slightly.
Okay. And is it safe to say, too, as far as your upgraded evidence process and evidence room and technologies have created efficiencies as well?
They have created efficiencies, but I would not say that they are directly correlated to that line item. That line item is just consumable supplies like evidence bags and RFID tags that are associated with the new evidence system.
And there's not a need, per se, of an immediate response to increasing that line item if you would have a lead on knowing whether or not that was an area that you would have to reinforce before the year ended.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And that is the extent of my questions. I appreciate this. As you can tell, this committee has a propensity to ask a lot of questions, and it's a matter of seeing the bigger picture and understanding the individual steps, the blocks that you have taken to meet the standard set for your budget guidelines. So we do appreciate your time. I don't have anything further. I'm going to ask my fellow committee members if they have anything further. Councilor Maglio.
Could you explain something again for me? I didn't catch it all. What you had mentioned about the police detail line and this amount of money, this is after all, well, you know what? Instead of me reflecting what I think I understood, if you could just explain it again, that would be helpful.
Sure. So that line is exclusively for details at the South Shore Plaza, which I didn't mention it before, but generally encompass weekend details, so there's coverage on Saturdays and Sundays, as well as increased police presence during the holidays. As we know, basically from the day after Thanksgiving through the first of the year is a very busy time at the South Shore Plaza. So that number that you see on the operating budget is basically what is left over from the total contracted amount between the town of Braintree and the South Shore Plaza. So you take that starting point, the starting amount from the contract, it's reduced by a small portion that is allocated to the fire department, then reduced by the salaries for the 3 officers, or the 2 officers and 1 sergeant who are assigned to the South Shore Plaza Monday through Friday. And what is left over from that contractual payment is used for to fund police details.
And if I may take one step back from that, so unlike all other police details that are performed, the town traditionally enters into a 2-year contract with the South Shore Plaza that sets a total contract amount, and so those costs are reduced from that contract amount, and the balance for the details is what's reflected in the line.
Can you repeat that last part of what you said?
Sure.
About what is reflected in the line?
Sure. So every 2 years the town enters into an agreement with the South Shore Plaza for the provision of police services at the mall. And those services include staffing with 2 patrol officers and a sergeant during the week, as well as an allocation that's dedicated specifically to the fire department for services provided at the South Shore Plaza. And the balance that remains, once those expenses are taken out of the total, gets entered into this line, which covers those weekend and holiday details of police services being provided at the mall.
So this $184,000 represents the town's investment in making sure there are details at South Shore Plaza on Saturdays and Sundays and holidays.
No, the South Shore Plaza pays that amount.
So this $184,000 is a pass-through.
Correct. It comes to us from the plaza and accounted for in this line.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. So it's kind of a wash. So unless there's an incident, just like anywhere else in the town, unless there's an incident, the extra patrols that are stationed at the plaza, because this is a question that comes up a lot, that people want to know. The plaza is paying for that. I know that there are extra drive-bys. I know that exists, but I'm seeing that maybe that's not the case.
Yes and no. So we assigned 3 officers down there, a sergeant and 2 patrol officers.
For the contract?
As part of the agreement with the plaza.
Okay.
I don't know how long it's been 3. I think it was 2 originally, but it's been 3 prior to my time here. So we absorb the cost of like backfill for them. So if one of them is on vacation, that's not reflected in that number you're looking at. So there is some costs on our end, that we absorb as having 3 people assigned down there. The details are all the weekends, all the holiday season where we have a big presence down there, and I'd say maybe any other big incidents that we can use that money for. We try to obviously maximize the money, so we'll maximize the staffing down there, like during the holiday season, to get what we need, but it might not, it might allow us to have some extra staffing in another time of the year too.
Okay. I think I'm clear about that. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, I'm done. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
All set, Counselor? Thank you. All right. So, I think that concludes our questions this evening for the police department, and we thank all of you for being here this evening. And if there's anything further or any additional comments from anybody?
I'll just say that from the police department perspective, these 2 right here do an amazing job, and I feel very fortunate with their oversight and their diligence with the finances. I'm kind of like the substitute in the background. They come to me and we talk about it, but they're doing all the heavy lifting and all the work. So, I mean, all the numbers you see reflected here are from them, and they have a really good handle on this stuff. And it's something that they spend a significant amount of their time on. Obviously, Mary spends all her time on that, other than DTS. But all this preparation and everything is these 2 doing all this work, and it's just that's why you have such detailed information before you and all the answers. So.
And we appreciate that very much, and it's obvious. I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure my fellow committee members will comment that there is always a level of efficiency and detail when it comes to dealing with the police department, and this was another example of that. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I do want to ask Ms. Pomeroy if there's anything at all you may have for comment or question before we move on.
No, they've answered all of our questions. Reading through the summaries, everything looks like it was in very good shape.
Thank you. Okay, well that concludes, we have nothing else on discussion this evening. So it concludes our discussions on Order 22025 for this evening. And there's no vote that's required by any of us. So I will ask for a motion to table Order 22025 to our next Ways and Means meeting on May 18th, 2022 at 6 p.m. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.